Hello there, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome to today's telecoms.com intelligence webinar. Today, this is brought to you in association with AsiaInfo. My name is Tim Skinner, and joining me today is Andy Tiller, who is the VP of Marketing at AsiaInfo. Andy is going to be talking about the future of BSS and will be discussing some of the results from the telecoms.com intelligence annual industry survey. We ran this earlier this year and brought together a number of responses from a variety, a cross-section of the industry. Andy and his team at AsiaInfo then went on and conducted further analysis of the results, and Andy will be bringing those results to you today. At the end of the session, we're going to be having an audio Q&A session with Andy. So should you have any questions that come up during the presentation, please use the dialog box that you can see on this page to submit your questions. We will then get round to as many questions as we can during the allotted time at the end of the presentation. But without any further ado, I am now going to hand over to Andy for today's presentation. Andy, it's over to you.
Thanks, Tim. So our topic for today is the future of BSS, clear minds or clouded thinking. In this webinar, we'll be discussing market insights which are based on the 2016 annual industry survey by telecoms.com intelligence, which had over 3,000 respondents across the industry. We specifically looked at telecom operator responses. So what AsiaInfo did was to take the raw data from the survey and extract just the responses from network operators and service providers. So we wanted to find the views of operators about the future of business support systems, or BSS. We wanted to know whether they're ready to deploy cloud-based BSS and what they think the benefits are. We also wanted to gauge operator perspectives on the need for BSS transformation and their preferred approaches to doing BSS upgrades, and also the levels of innovation in BSS-related services such as pricing. There were over 700 operator respondents in the survey, and so we used that as the basis for our data set. But not every operator answered every question, so we filtered out, and there were on average 370 legitimate responses to each question. By that I mean we filtered out operator respondents who said they were not qualified to answer the question or who didn't answer the question. So we analysed the data, and we were particularly interested to pick out variations by geographic region and by operator type. And you can see here that we had 6 geographic regions, quite a number of respondents from each region, and we had a variety of different types of operator as well. So we were able to cut and slice the analysis to give regional and operator type breakdowns. The questions in the BSS section of the survey covered 2 main areas. The first was to do with cloud-based BSS, where we discovered a surprising degree of acceptance for cloud, even for public cloud. Over 70% of respondents said they are ready to deploy cloud BSS, and a similar percentage believe that in future all telco IT systems will be cloud-based. And the key driver here is a desire to reduce the infrastructure costs and the OPEX of the data center. Public cloud specifically is of great interest, although there are some concerns remaining over data security and privacy issues and some other things. But surprisingly, public cloud is very much of interest, and not just private cloud deployments. The second area covered BSS innovation and transformation. And we found most operators believe that today's BSS systems are really not capable of supporting future telco business models. And therefore, we expect a wave of transformation projects, and indeed that's what we and I expect you are seeing happening in the market today. The top drivers for change are still areas around pricing innovation and competitive differentiation, for example, in customer experience, where BSS, I think, has always been seen as a critical enabler. But increasingly, the need for business transformation and development of new business models is also driving BSS change. Interestingly, it's emerging markets which are perhaps adopting more innovation in BSS-related services such as pricing innovation, and mature markets such as North America and Europe are lagging behind. So our first question relates to operators' readiness for deploying cloud-based BSS. And the results reveal that most operators and service providers say they are ready to deploy cloud BSS services, with the majority saying that they're already doing so or planning to do so in the next 2 years. This may seem a bit surprising, but I think the results are in line with the current industry trends for operators to deploy parts of their BSS in cloud, overlay projects, or implementing specific BSS applications, either in their own private cloud infrastructure or perhaps public cloud for some greenfield operations, supporting new services or new digital channels. So we also know operators are introducing virtualization and other technologies associated with cloud computing in their own data centers and adopting public cloud for some types of activities. But here we were not explicit about the difference between public and private cloud. We asked operators just how ready they are to use cloud technology. And so a positive response to this question doesn't necessarily imply operators are shifting their entire IT stack wholesale to the public cloud, at least not yet. We also gave each response a cloud readiness score, 7 points if the respondent said they already have cloud-based BSS, 5 for currently implementing, and so on, down to negative 5 points for never planning to implement. And then we aggregated those results across the regions, and you can see here a good measure of regional cloud readiness. So Africa, Asia Pacific, Europe, and North America seem to be readier than South America and the Middle East, which are notably behind. It's quite interesting that Africa often comes out the top of surveys like this, where we're asking about innovation and advanced technologies. I think for those of you familiar with the African market, this actually rings true. There's a lot of innovation going on in Africa. I think there's also quite a positive attitude to life as well. They tend to mark high, I think. But nevertheless, I think the results are valid here. Our next question sought to look at the motivations for pursuing a cloud-based BSS strategy. And clearly from the results, the most significant driver is cost reduction, particularly IT operational cost. Infrastructure cost is obvious because cloud-based technologies are cheaper than regular traditional data center infrastructure. But operational cost and maintenance is also an interesting area, because especially with cloud, you can consolidate a lot of IT operations into a single data center. That also affects the ability to consolidate BSS onto a single environment, perhaps across a number of operators within a single group. Also of interest is the more rapid introduction of a new BSS system. That applies particularly for public cloud BSS, where the deployment can already be in place and you just begin by configuring it. Whereas with a traditional data center project or private cloud, you begin by asking, where are we going to put the equipment for this new system, and is there room in the data center? So you can get to market faster with public cloud especially. Scalability up and down is a clear benefit of cloud, especially if you have public cloud infrastructure where you're relying on the provider, Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure or whoever, to provide the resource and you just utilize it when you need it. While cost reductions were seen as the biggest benefit of cloud platforms by the largest number of operators, there were some interesting regional variations. For example, you can see here in the under the red circles that operator respondents in Asia and Europe were most interested in the ability of cloud-based BSS to scale up and down on demand. I think in the Asia-Pacific region, although it's comprised of both mature and developing markets, it's clear that there's still room for a lot of growth in subscriber base in many countries. And it makes sense that operators in that region would want flexible scalability of their back-office IT systems to scale up on demand with the introduction of new subscribers, new offers, and so on. In Europe, where the markets are more mature, it's interesting to speculate why the scalability of cloud systems would be of interest. And Perhaps that's due to the anticipation of growing demand from new technologies such as the Internet of Things. Also, it's worth noting in this analysis, I don't have the chart here, but if you look at how the motivations vary by different operator type, you find that there are some differences. For example, fixed line operators have the greatest interest in consolidating their BSS environments and using cloud for that purpose. And that possibly reflects the larger amount of legacy back office systems compared to other types of operators with less history. But overall, I think from the analysis, there is a strong operator belief in the ability of cloud-based BSS to reduce their IT operating and infrastructure costs and scale according to their future demands. So far in the questions, we didn't specify whether the cloud is private or public, but this question draws that out. So we can ask here, what are the main concerns about public cloud deployments of BSS? And you can see that by far the number one is data security and privacy. So these concerns remain for public cloud deployments, and they are perceived to be the biggest barrier to moving BSS into the public cloud across all geographic regions and all operator types. In fact, North American operators were the most concerned about security and data privacy, with 71% indicating that this is their most significant barrier. South American operators showed the least concern. Perhaps not surprisingly, data security is at the top of the list and top of mind for many network operators and service providers worldwide. There are tough data privacy laws in place in many regions which make operators reluctant to move their back office IT systems into public cloud. And some recent high-profile data breaches have created a backlash from consumers, which tends to make operators quite conservative on this issue. Data privacy is a related issue, slightly different from data security. It's more to do with compliance with regional regulations, for example, keeping customer data within the European Union in that particular context. I think it's worth noting that there are some interesting mixed messages potentially from operators on this topic. So we see announcements around operators offering their own public cloud infrastructure as a service to enterprise customers. So it seems operators are perhaps okay with their own public cloud security and data privacy, but are not willing to use or not so confident of using third-party public cloud environments at this stage. But I think a lot of these are perceptual barriers, not necessarily real barriers today. A smaller proportion of respondents cited other hurdles to moving BSS into public cloud, including availability and reliability of the public cloud platforms, local data regulation issues, and particularly internal hesitancy towards change. And that's an interesting one. Concerns about that were most prevalent in the larger operators, I guess, regionally, and also in the fixed line operators, where 36% said that internal hesitancy to change was the biggest barrier to taking the plunge into public cloud. Despite the concerns that showed up on the previous slide, it seems there's clearly a very strong belief in cloud BSS, including public cloud, among all types of operators and service providers across all geographic regions. 73% are saying they strongly agree that telco business IT systems will all be cloud-based in the future. We know operators who said they're not going to buy any more hardware after 2020. But respondents were split on the issue today whether public cloud is already secure and robust enough to deploy their mission-critical IT systems. Interestingly, almost half said that public cloud is indeed reliable enough today for their mission-critical IT systems. So there is, despite the concerns on the previous slide, there is a lot of confidence in public cloud already, and certainly an expectation that public cloud is the environment for the future. Interestingly, in the bottom part of this question, we asked operators to tell us whether they felt that telco was a special case with more stringent requirements and barriers to deploying their IT systems in the public cloud, and the majority agreed with that. Interestingly, especially in Asia Pacific, telcos believe that perhaps due to their specific regulatory environments, it's harder for them to move their mission-critical IT systems into public cloud compared to other enterprises. This chart shows how different regions responded relative to each other. So a negative score below the 0 line shows that that particular region answered the question below average, and other regions above average. So here we can see that among operators that didn't trust the reliability and security of public cloud, the highest proportion is actually from North America, which seems unusual considering that US public cloud infrastructure and acceptance of public cloud for enterprise applications is pretty mature. But perhaps I think this could reflect North America's perhaps over-heightened sensitivity to data security and privacy issues, especially given a handful of recent high-profile data breaches and strong public reaction to those issues. But overall, opinions are mixed. There's clearly strong confidence in robustness, security, and ability to handle large-scale projects in public cloud among a large number of operators across regions. And we can see industry momentum moving in that direction. We next asked the question about how operators plan to approach their BSS upgrade projects or IT transformation. And as one might expect, operators are generally conservative in their approaches to major transformation. But a significant minority now are interested in more radical approaches to BSS upgrades. Of course, there are many ways to do a BSS transformation project, and many operators prefer to take a gradual approach where they replace one component at a time. For example, putting in a new charging platform or CRM system. But now we're finding that this approach, you tend to take one piece of the jigsaw out and replace it with another piece that has to be the same shape, so you end up with what you started with. And this kind of inability to make progress is perhaps making this approach less attractive than it used to be. And we're seeing more interest in radical approaches, such as a complete IT system overhaul or adopting cloud-based BSS as a service even. And ultimately, these can be more efficient ways of upgrading BSS. In fact, nearly a quarter of respondents in the survey were in favor of these more radical approaches to transformation. Especially most interested were operators in emerging markets, while operators in North America were least interested. 21% of Asia-Pac operators favored a shift to cloud-based BSS as a service, which was more than twice the global average of 10%. Interestingly, there's relatively little support for the idea of dumbing down the IT stack, and only 10% of operators said that the traditional telco IT is too complex and wanted simpler, cheaper, more standardized systems. But support for this approach was the highest in North America, with 16% of respondents there. We next asked about innovation based on BSS, for example, pricing innovation. And you can see here we asked a number of questions. Do you have these particular pricing innovations or BSS service innovations in place today? And we found a variety of different responses to this. We asked about differential pricing based on data speed or quality of service, the ability to make real-time personalized offers based on the customer's individual context, personalization of price plans and tariffs and bolt-on packages, time-limited offers for data services instead of usage-limited offers, access to particular services, Facebook at a fixed price or free of charge, for example, and sponsored data, where the content provider pays for the end customer's data service to access the content. So we found here a variety of different responses. Sponsored data looks pretty uninteresting from this point of view, or relatively little implementation. In fact, that's very regional. Across Asia-Pacific, sponsored data is very much a well-established tool, whereas it's newer and perhaps less successful in mature markets where customers tend to have a large bundle of data and don't care so much about the data charges for individual content access. We gave each operator respondent a pricing innovation score based on the number of the items they'd ticked on the previous slide. So the pricing innovation score is effectively the percentage of the maximum possible score which would be obtained if all respondents in the category in the region, for example, ticked all of the answers. So 100% response in Asia Pacific would mean that all the operator respondents said they had all of the different innovations that we saw on the previous slide. And on this basis, we can see actually what we might expect, which is that a lot of the pricing innovation and innovation around BSS services is happening in emerging markets, where there's a lot of competition, a lot of capability to differentiate on pricing, and a lot of use of new technologies to enable personalization by the end customer. So Asia Pacific and Africa are well ahead on these. Again, North America comes in at the bottom of the list, offering fewer pricing innovations and BSS innovations than other regions today. Looking more deeply at the drivers for IT innovation and transformation, operators rated many different considerations as important drivers. But the survey revealed that the most important consideration across all regions was pricing innovation and competitive differentiation, especially around areas such as improving customer experience. Omnichannel customer experience was key. That's an initiative that's happening in many different markets, in many different industries as well. And enabling customer analytics and monetization of customer insights obtained from those analytics is also a key driver. One interesting regional variation was that the ability of BSS transformation, or the need for BSS transformation to support the development of new business models, making money in different ways, was considered 25% more important to operators in Asia Pacific than in other regions on average. So we see that, again, perhaps that's indicative of the innovation, both in terms of customer experience and pricing, but also in terms of business models that's happening in Asia Pac ahead of mature markets in Europe and America. The results here indicate that operators perceive very much the value of BSS transformation as a way to differentiate their service offerings, develop new services based on data analytics, as well as to improve customer experience and customer relationships. Drilling a bit further into why BSS transformation is seen as essential, here we can see that the majority of respondents said that most BSS platforms today are actually not capable of supporting future telco business models, which underlies the need for IT transformation. That's the second item on the list. Nearly all operators and service providers agreed that flexible BSS systems are critically important for delivering optimal customer experience, and most also said that flexible BSS is essential to competitive differentiation. Those are kind of the expected benefits of BSS transformation traditionally. But the top two items on the chart here show a great deal of interest now in using the BSS as an enabler to transform future business strategy and business models. So these are, more than half of operators are saying that they need their BSS transformation for that purpose, as well as the traditional ones of improving customer experience and pricing innovation. So what can we conclude from all this? Well, it's pretty clear that IT transformation is seen as essential to support business transformation. Most operators believe that their existing BSS platforms are not fit to support future business models, so the need for change is pretty clear. And that ties in with what I think all of us are seeing in the industry, that there is a renewed interest in IT transformation right now. While the industry is traditionally quite conservative, new options for BSS transformation, such as cloud-based BSS, are becoming increasingly attractive as important enablers for change for operators to adopt. And indeed, there is increasing confidence that public cloud may be ready for mission-critical telco IT applications, and nearly all operators agree that the future of telco IT is in the cloud, even if they don't agree with that today. Whether it's motivated by cost savings or IT infrastructure scalability or the streamlining of back-office environments, operators are recognizing the advantages of cloud-based BSS today. And in future, I think flexible cloud-based BSS will clearly be an enabler for operators to achieve competitive differentiation and deliver the best experience to their customers. Not only that, but also to transform the business. So I'm going to hand back now to Tim to mediate the question and answer session. So please stay on the line and feed your questions in through the form. One more thing quickly while that's loading up. If you'd like to have further information about the analysis that we carried out on the survey results, then you can visit our website, asiainfo.com/BSS Cloud Survey, and you'll find downloads there which include a white paper with the detailed results. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Okay, Andy, thanks very much indeed for the presentation there. It seems that there's a lot for us to take in, but that we are definitely on the verge of seeing a big move towards cloud-based BSS. And with that, I'm going to be bringing in the Q&A session now. I've got Andy with me on the line here, and he's ready to take any questions that you guys throw at us for the next 15 minutes or so. So if you have any questions that came up during that presentation, whether it's to do with the technology aspects of cloud-based BSS or how you think operators are going to be adopting the technology, please use the dialog box that you can see on the left-hand side of your browser. So we're going to start with a question here, Andy, that relates to a complete overhaul or an incremental shift to cloud-based BSS or BSS as a service. So the question here reads, in the case of radical BSS upgrades, what is the difference between a complete overhaul or a transitional shift to BSS as a service? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think actually they both represent a complete overhaul, but the first one is about the traditional data center on-premise approach, where you would swap out most of the components or all of the components of your BSS stack and replace them with a new system and migrate over perhaps in a big bang approach or in a phased way. But BSS as a service implies a true cloud-based model. There could be a number of differences. The key thing is it would be in a cloud environment, not on the operator's premise. It would be accessed remotely and operated by the operator. And potentially the commercial model would be different as well. It could be a full SaaS-based commercial model where the user of the BSS system would pay per subscriber per month type approach rather than a traditional license and upgrade services and so on. So the deployment model is the difference. It could in fact be exactly the same technology, the same IT stack, the same BSS modules in both environments, and both would represent a complete change from the legacy environment.
And speaking of operator approaches to the adoption of cloud in this instance, the next question that I'm going to ask you is asking, in such a competitive market environment, do we think that operators will sort of be very enamored with the idea of opting for the clouds? Will they receive the flexibility and the agility they need to be able to migrate or exchange their databases as and when required?
I think actually the competitive environment is one reason why cloud can be attractive, because you have to have a competitive advantage in a competitive market. And one way to get a competitive advantage is to save cost and be more efficient, and therefore you can invest those savings to deliver improved customer experience or new services, whatever. So I think competitiveness is one of the things that's driving interest in cloud. I think whether operators will adopt cloud is a slightly different issue. It's about, in some cases, attitude to risk. We saw that chart, I think slide 11, which showed remaining concerns about releasing, in particular, operators' data into public cloud environment. And that's something that needs to be balanced. against the risk of not being competitive, I think. So and what we're finding in the market at the moment is that there's a lot of discussion on these topics. Everybody's interested to see if it can really work. Everybody's looking for an edge, for a competitive advantage, and cloud is one of the interesting topics in BSS. So there's other ones as well, of course. It's not all about just moving what you've got into the cloud and you'll be happy. There's a lot of other things, but cloud is certainly one of the the topics of great interest right now.
And you touched on a couple of things there about the risk and the risk versus reward, I suppose. And there's obviously a hesitation towards adopting cloud for cloud's sake. But one of the questions that I'm going to ask now, then, and the next question is relating to some of the QoS quality of service improvements that may be achieved through cloud-based BSS. So although I don't think we directly addressed the quality of service benefits in the survey, what are your thoughts on cloud-based BSS as a means of improving sort of quality of service for the end user?
I'm not sure that's directly related to cloud as such. I think that's one of the key things that you're trying to do with a BSS transformation, introducing personalization of services for the end customer, introducing omni-channel so the customer gets a better user experience of both the purchasing items and also customer support. So those improvements, I think, can be delivered in a traditional approach or in a cloud approach. You also asked about risk. I think the key thing here is what kind of risk you're talking about. So there's always a risk with any change, especially with very sophisticated, complex IT systems in a telco environment. It's touching them. You don't really want to break them because there's potential disaster there. So that's what we deal with every day. But I think there's a risk of failing to achieve the migration with an overambitious strategy. For instance, something radical like a cloud-based, adopting in BSS as a service or a complete IT overhaul, quite ambitious. There's a lot of risk there, but there's equally a lot of risk in taking a traditional approach, and it's a different risk. It's the risk that you won't really achieve anything. I think this idea of swapping out one piece at a time has a lot of downsides. You end up with a lot of customization because you take one piece of the jigsaw out, you try and put a new piece in. It's got to fit into the existing environment, so you have to file the edges off your new piece. You maybe have to add a bit of putty in the hole to make it the right shape, and you end up pretty much with something rather similar to what you had before. And that approach, whilst it's more likely to technically succeed, is less likely to achieve the business objectives of being able to introduce radically new customer experience or save a lot of cost.
One of the areas that we did mention during the questions and that you addressed during the presentation then was about barriers to implementation, and maybe a different kind of risk that we're addressing here now is about the security and the data privacy elements of moving to the cloud. So I'm going to ask you two questions here that came through. The first one is what barriers surrounding security and data privacy are affecting this topic, specifically in Europe? And then secondly, as a follow-on question from that, what is AsiaInfo specifically doing to tackle privacy and security concerns here?
Well, so Europe is a good example of what you'd find worldwide, really. There's always regulations about data privacy, and there's public concerns about that, and even stronger concerns about data security, So in the EU, for instance, there are regulations which require customer data to be kept within EU countries. In some countries like Germany, the regulations are more strict, and you can't take customer data outside of Germany. So essentially any cloud-based deployment has the potential to not comply with those regulations unless it's designed correctly, and the public cloud provider can support those requirements. One of the things that AsiaInfo has done recently is to announce a strategic partnership with Amazon Web Services for our cloud deployment. So, and part of that was really getting to grips with these data privacy and security issues. Can Amazon support the necessary data security and on the infrastructure side, and AsiaInfo on the application security side? Designing all of that correctly, and then also on the data privacy, how do we ensure compliance or guarantee compliance with EU regulation, even for disaster recovery, for instance. If the data center goes down, you have to shift to another data center. Actually, AWS has very good answers on these questions, and you could argue that probably regarding data security, Amazon data centers are perhaps even more secure than some operator data centers. Operator data centers are not necessarily hack-free, and Amazon has security guards. They have a huge investment in proper security for their data centers. So there's quite a lot of arguments why public cloud may in fact be definitely secure enough. And also compliant with EU regulations. So I think I'm not sure that that's really the most real issue with public cloud deployment. I think there are some other things like the SLA that public cloud providers typically offer to enterprise customers is a lot less than the SLA which we as a vendor supporting a telco operator client would sign up to in terms of things like response times to issues. So those things need to be joined up at both ends so that infrastructure issues, the SLA on infrastructure issues matches what telcos require. But and there's other issues that often come up, things like latency. What if the cloud data center is a long way from the network? Usually that's not really an issue, even for real-time applications such as real-time prepaid charging, because 300 kilometers of distance adds about 1 millisecond of round-trip latency. So usually you can even run the real-time applications in the public cloud, although hybrid models are available for operators that don't trust that approach.
Speaking of the public cloud, then we've got a couple of minutes here, by the way, Andy. So we'll move on quickly. We've got a question here asking how public cloud SaaS specifically, in a billing proposition from that, will it ever give tier one carriers the real flexibility that they need to fully differentiate themselves from their competitors?
Well, it depends what the system in the cloud is. I think traditionally the answer has been no, or historically it's been no, because what's been available as a cloud-based, billing or BSS solution is generally a dumbed-down system, lowest common denominator, and using a Salesforce type model where it's one system for all. Now, cloud doesn't necessarily imply that. It can be a fully sophisticated BSS, the same one that a telco would deploy in their own data center on a virtual a virtual cloud that's owned essentially by that one operator, and it can be a highly configurable system. It's not shared. Wouldn't have Vodafone sharing with Telefonica on the same IT stack, the same instance. Right. So, and in fact, that's the approach that AsiaInfo's taken. We haven't dumbed down the cloud-based solution and taken our standard software suite and changed it in any way. We've deployed it. The only constraint is that it's the fully integrated system. So we're not taking the jigsaw apart and putting it in the cloud and then expecting to join, a cloud piece of jigsaw with an existing legacy environment, at least for the key components of BSS, which are CRM, billing, and product catalog. I think if you break those apart, you end up with quite a lot of customization required usually. And so as long as you keep those components together and integrate, to external systems around the edges, then you can put the full BSS stack in the cloud and make it highly configurable. The configurability goes away once you start to mix systems with a different data model, with different business processes, and so on. So I think that what I'm trying to say is the answer is yes, you can support a the flexibility needed by a Tier 1 carrier in a cloud BSS environment in exactly the same way as you would do it in their own data center.
And that leads me on to another question surrounding the private cloud element. So BSS as a service providers, how do you see them being able to evolve their licensing models to be competitive with private clouds? When we consider, and this is a big mega trend that's on the horizon that we haven't really talked about here, when we consider the growth of IoT and how that's going to be affecting the entire sort of BSS landscape for operators.
Yeah. Well, of course, a traditional licensing model, software licensing model, is based on an upfront license fee and then a support and maintenance fee annually, plus professional services work for any change requests needed or new integration or whatever. The SaaS model is totally different. It's everything included. So the model would be a fixed fee per subscriber per month, perhaps. Including all of the infrastructure, all of the software, all of the system upgrades, which potentially even happen behind the scenes without really impacting anything in the front end. All happening seamlessly at the back end, and then but effectively they come to the same thing. You can work out what was the equivalent. What's the mapping between those two models. What's different, I think, is when you start to introduce IoT, you've got a whole a different type of model. A thing is not the same as a subscriber. It doesn't have the same value necessarily. Where the Internet of Things comes in, there are different types of things. Different types of things have different types of value, just as consumer customers and business customers, prepay and postpay and so on, have different types of value as well. And usually software licensing tries to somehow reflect either the amount of work that the software is doing or else the amount of value it's providing. And of course, if you can't really charge the same amount per subscriber for somebody who is a prepaid customer with a ARPU of $1 a month compared to a very high value postpay or business customer. The software does a different amount of work and the value to the operator is different. So software pricing is complicated by the Internet of Things, not just in the cloud environment, but also in for every type of BSS.
Okay. We've got a couple more questions here before we finish off then, and they're both related to sort of the major sort of technological shift associated here. Then, so the question that we've got here is asking you whether you're able to comment on what's new or what technologies these new approaches to BSS are based upon. The examples they ask here are things like microservices or open source solutions. Are you able to comment on that?
Yeah, so there's an important technical thing, which is making your software run very efficiently on cloud-based environments. So virtualization, perhaps using open source technologies like Docker, is quite trendy and very promising. Microservices, all of these things are designed to make the software run efficiently in a cloud data center. And of course, if you're offering a true cloud service, as a vendor, it's very important that you do that, because that cost is something that you bear rather than the operator in this model. So if as a vendor, if we are offering a BSS as a service and we're running our software on Amazon Web Services, then we're paying Amazon for the infrastructure, and we are charging the operator for the use of the software and the infrastructure. And in that way, it's in our interest. We can offer a lower price to the customer, or alternatively make a higher profit if we need less AWS infrastructure to run our applications. So now, if we are using the traditional model and deploying our software in an operator's data center, then of course it's the same benefit. If the operator deploys we can have an offering which requires less infrastructure, less space in the data center, less hardware to buy if we're using these new technologies.
Well, that's conveniently swept upon one of the other questions that we had in, which is asking about the role of things like NFV in this environment, or at least virtualization. Okay, final question then, Andy, and we're going to come back to one of the broader sort of macro themes here. Then is operator mindsets to what is considered rather a radical IT transformation. So the question here, then, the final question here is, then, compared with some historical projects to do with IT transformations that fail, this remains, or that may have failed, this remains very much on the agenda still. Would you say that, in your opinion, this is worth the risk, or conversely, should operators remain conservative?
Well, I think cloud can help with this. One of the dangers with a traditional approach to IT transformation is that you spend a lot of time, you begin with the as-is environment and you define your new architecture and you call that to be, and then you map before to after, and you spend the first 18 months rebuilding what you already had in the new environment. And then, that was probably breaking the world record, and then you start to do something new with the new system. So it takes a long time, whereas with a cloud-based approach, you can be a little bit more experimental. If the system's already sitting there waiting to be configured, you can start to play with it immediately. So it removes some of that risk, that you can really see what you're going to use immediately, and you can. In fact, I think what we envisage happening is pretty much as is happening today. Operators will begin experimenting with little greenfield operations or digital overlay type projects with public cloud. They're doing that already, and if you want to then integrate that with the full IT environments, all of the existing front office channels and all of the existing enterprise data warehouse and business processes and so on, you have to bring it back into the data center. We think in future it's going to work the other way around, and that instead of taking the cloud stuff back in-house, more and more will be added to the cloud. So migration towards the cloud, as opposed to experimentation in the cloud and migration back in-house, will be the way things go in future. Purely for economic reasons, it just doesn't make sense to try and to have your own data center in the future. The economics of it are, just they don't add up. Amazon can offer a much more efficient infrastructure. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that everyone's ready to the economic benefits are not the only factors. We've looked at data security and privacy and all kinds of other issues. But those aside, there's no reason why you'd want to have your own data center operation in the future, I think, and that's what we're seeing. That's why we're seeing the interest in cloud, and that's why we see the results we saw in the survey.
Mm. And it appears, based on some of the results that we've revealed from the survey and some of the results that you've been discussing today, that there's more confidence from operators about this move, and that perhaps the various sort of technology platforms enabling that have matured to a point where there is a lot more confidence, a lot more trust in that. Okay, with that then, Andy, I'd like to thank you very much indeed for answering a relatively broad cross-section of questions that have come in for you over the last 20 minutes or so. So thank you very much indeed for that.
Thank you very much, Tim.
And I also like to extend thanks for AsiaInfo for helping to make today's webinar possible. And to thank everyone who attended today. I hope that you found some real use and some real benefit out of participating with today's presentation, and that anyone who answered their questions indeed got them answered. Should there have been any questions that we were unable to answer due to time constraints, please rest assured that Andy and the AsiaInfo team will be able to get in touch with you just to make sure that your questions are sorted. And with that note, I'd just like to draw a close to today's webinar. Thank everyone rather for participating with us today. Just a quick reminder that you can download the 2016 annual industry survey, from which the statistics for today's presentation were gleaned. So you can download that using the banner image that you can see at the bottom of this page. So that's it for now. Thank you very much indeed for tuning in, and we will see you again very soon for another telecoms.com webinar. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.